Okay, we talk about memory management a little bit. And these are differences. These are some gotchas with Blazor server side. With dependency management for the longest time, even going back to 2003 with early .NET Framework IOC containers, when they were all third party and Microsoft didn't even provide one, there were 3 levels of scoping, and they were called singleton, transient, and hybrid. Now, when Microsoft created their own and built it into .NET Core, hybrid kind of got renamed to scoped. Whereas originally hybrid was for the life of a web request. Well, now it's called scoped. Microsoft gets to build it in and rename things. That's fine. So scoped means for the life of a web request. Now, let's talk about the life of a web request. In Blazor, the Blazor JavaScript file is served up to the browser. The browser then turns right around and opens a WebSocket connection back to the server, and then sits there and waits with an open WebSocket connection to the server, and the original web request never ends. Okay, so the net effect is scoped becomes not scoped as in singleton, scoped to the life of that particular user's session. Okay, very different from the life of a web request. Now it's the life of a user's session, which can last until they close their browser. Okay, singleton is for the scope of the process that it's running. So if you have 2 web servers, then you're going to have one instance of those dependencies on one server, one instance of those dependencies on the other server. And then transient, of course, is get me a new object every time. For WebAssembly, scoped is kind of irrelevant because the life of a web request is the web request that loaded the WebAssembly application. That WebAssembly application is running in a particular user's browser as an independent process. So the scope of the web request is just as long as the scope of that user's session, which is just as long as the scope of that running process in the browser until they close that tab. So it's going to behave observably the same as singleton. So just want you to know, Blazor WebAssembly, you effectively have transient, and then you have singleton scoped, which are going to be the same. For Blazor WebAssembly, you have transient, then you have scoped to the life of a user's session, and then you have singleton for a particular web server. Okay. Now, in Blazor server side, there is an abandonment logic, and the server will keep all of the memory of a user session for 3 minutes until it can't find that user anymore, and then all that memory will be cleaned up. If on smartphones especially, if someone is browsing a URL and it has Blazor server side in it, and then they turn off their phone and put it in their pocket, well, the smartphone is going to hibernate that browser, and it's going to be disconnected from the network, and the server is going to sit there holding on to that memory of that user session, trying to listen for a reconnect. Now, within that 3 minutes, if the phone comes out of the pocket and all that state is there, and the smartphone browsers kind of reconnect, then the server will reattach. There's really smart logic there. Will reattach the same session, and nothing will be lost until you hit the timeout. That timeout is configurable. If you find that you just have a lot of disconnects, then you can shorten the timeout so that you don't waste as much memory all the time. And if you have low traffic and you don't have any memory pressure, but you have a lot of disconnected users, you can increase that, no problem. All right. I'm harping on several things because Blazor server side is a new thing. And Blazor WebAssembly is kind of normal, what you would expect. It's kind of a native application. It's running on the user's hardware, CPU, and memory. So you can measure how much you're going to use, and there's not a whole lot of surprises there. And then on the web server side, it's web services. So a lot of people are very familiar with web services. There are no surprises there. Blazor server side is the new thing, and there are a lot of surprises. And so another one is with Entity Framework. Now, if you're using .NET Core, then then you need to use the guidance from Microsoft. We included the URL right here on the slide because it's not built in. With .NET 5 and 6, they built this right into the API, and you can say your services collection add DB factory, and so effectively this problem is because of scoped dependency management. Normally, Entity Framework likes to be scoped. And so when you say add DB context, it's the same thing as calling add scoped for the life of a web request. For web applications and web services applications, that's what you want for Entity Framework so that it can use the same amount of caching for the life of a web request. But this doesn't work for the life of a user session, where a user session can be days long. If you have an Entity Framework DB context instance that's days long, it could effectively be caching all of the data in the database and just suck up all of your memory, and then accidentally not go back to the database for renewed state and be serving stale data because there's caching built in. And so in this pattern, you want to be wary of that and make sure that you don't accidentally use a scoped DB context for a Blazor server-side application. So be wary of that.